indeed. This is another edition of Ethan's Movie Lounge. And here we are looking at David Fincher's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, starring Daniel Craig, Rooney Mara, and Christopher Plummer, and Stellan Skarsgard, who seems to be the only actual Swedish person in one of the major roles. We also have Wright. The cast is pretty well stacked. Even Steven Berkoff, who was most famous for playing Victor Maitland in Beverly Hills Cop. And now this film, of course, is based off of the Stieg Larsson novel of the same name. And of course, it being a Swedish book, they already had made this film in Sweden. And now the thing about this one, and I do really enjoy this motion picture. It is, and there are parts that are not enjoyable, but it is like very well done. You know, it's very David Fincher. The script adaptation was done by Steven Zalian, who is one of the greatest screenwriters of all time, and it has an ability to make like really boring shit interesting. And of course, like in the book specifically, there's a lot of like research. There's chapters and chapters of just Mikael Blomkvist, who Daniel Craig plays in the film, doing research. Now, the thing about the original Swedish films, of course, it's a book trilogy, and I think they did other books after that, because they made another movie that wasn't within that trilogy. But the original book, you know, is a lot of like mundane details and stuff. But even the movies kind of deal with it very well. And my biggest thing is where I enjoy like both films, I feel like the ideal cast would have been Daniel Craig as Blomkvist, and then Noomi Rapace, who was Salander in the original one, if they were able to do it together. Because I feel like both of them were severely mismatched, because like one is better than the other, where in this dynamic, both of them should be as good as the other, you know, because like Rooney Mara, you know, she does her thing, but she's not on the level that Daniel Craig is in this film. Daniel Craig gives a phenomenal performance at a time when he was like in his peak James Bond stint. You know, this was like right before Skyfall, so somewhere in between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall, and he's not really playing it like Bond. And what's cool is that opening credit sequence is very much a Bond credit sequence, and probably the best Bond credit sequence that he had his whole career, and it wasn't even for a Bond film. You know, that magnificent cover of the Immigrant Song performed by Karen O, and of course the music arranged by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who have a phenomenal score in this film. Of course, anytime that those two score a David Fincher film, it's some of the best work. You know, it's a very like immersive score. You know, you hear it and you're not sure that you know, it's like it's a part of the story, you know, and what's going on in this stuff. And a lot of times it feels like recycled material from his albums of Ghosts. And you know, but it's very well shot. You know, it kind of grabs the melancholy of the snow and stuff, and I feel it does a better job at interpreting the material in the Swedish version one does. And they do take a lot of liberty. Both films, the Swedish version and the American version, do take a lot of liberties with the film or with the book, the original material in the film. But I feel like the liberties that they take in the American film, I feel like if they could have went even further, because, you know, the book ends on a very devastating note where, like, because they, you know, through their working relationship of tracking down this missing girl and also uncovering a serial murderer of women, they end up fucking each other. And the thing about it is like, I can buy Daniel Craig as a journalist who gets a lot of pussy. I can't really buy the guy that played Blomkvist in the Swedish films. I can't really buy that guy getting a lot of pussy, you know. I mean, because dude was not just the fact that he's James Bond, but he kind of has that attitude and the swagger in the film. And I do kind of feel like Robin Wright was poorly miscast as the woman that runs the magazine with him and shit. But Rooney Mara, she does her own thing, and like Christopher Plummer gives an extraordinary performance as Henrik Vonyer, who basically hires Blomkvist when he's in an hour of need, so to speak, because he's just got slapped with a libel case, and somebody fucked him over on a lead and stuff, and all those details. What's beautiful is they're talked about, but they're not like hammered into the ground. They kind of just move along with it. And the beauty of David Fincher is that he can also make this boring, mundane stuff seems so interesting. Like we're watching these people like do research on a computer and all this stuff, and it's very like invigorating, visually stimulating too. You know, he's got a way of doing, and plus it's got his like whole dark, the atmosphere and everything to it, and you know that came to be synonymous with his style. I mean, it's one of those things. Now, the biggest complaint that I have with the film is the rape scene. You know, I have a thing against rape scenes. You know, I really don't feel they're necessary for film. You know, I don't see why we need to film rape, because even just not even on a philosophical question, you know, on like even just how the fuck do you film something like that? You know, that's got to be, you're recreating some of the worst shit you could possibly recreate in this. And so and what irks me the most is they show the guardian of Salander, you know, violently raping her, got her handcuffed to the bed. They'll show this in graphic detail, you know, even with the line, "Oh, I forgot to ask if you like anal sex." You know, I guess at least he wore a condom, but that's neither here nor there. They show this in graphic detail, but we can't even get some light scissoring between her and her little girlfriend in the film that she picks up at the rave bar. You know, we get a little soft kiss, but you know, we can't get some hot lesbian action, you know, like, because like I said, there's no point in showing rape scenes. You know, if you want to be like Sam Peckinpah and try to do the greatest rape scene of all time, then you're already a fucked up individual as it is, you know. And you know, and I guess filmmakers in general are pretty fucked up. And yeah, it's in the book, and yeah, they show it. But what's gratifying is the revenge she does get. I mean, granted, I had no qualm, but when she jams that, you know, large dildo up that dude's ass, you know, I mean, the fucker deserved what he got. It tattooed "I am a racist pig, I am a rapist pig" on his chest. And, you know, I mean, it's very poetic justice. And, you know, in a lot of ways, Salander is an avenging angel, and they play that up beautifully, you know, because she not only gets her revenge on the Guardian that is trying to, like, you know, basically blackmail her with sex, you know, and she helps Mikhail Blomkvist get his revenge, you know, because after they finally figure out what's going on, yeah, I could spoil it, you know, but it's all a bunch of details that I don't really want to go into. You know, if you read the book, you know, the books are okay. This movie is such a good adaptation. I mean, you know, Fincher's version is just such a good adaptation of that book that I never need to read the book again. You know, it really adds a lot of layers that you don't get with it, and it's definitely, as disturbing as it is, once these two get to working together, it's fucking brilliant. It moves like a bullet, because already you're dealing with, you know, getting revenge on your rapist, and, you know, having to deal with, you know, being in a fucking area where nobody wants you there, and you're all, you know, you're also like claimed libelous when, you know, you didn't lie, you just couldn't prove it, and all this shit. So, and the acting is very well done. You know, I mean, you know, I joke all I want about, you know, oh, there's hardly any there's Swedish actors in a movie that takes place in Sweden. You know, granted, it is an American production, but at least they are somewhat attempting an accent. Like I said, Stellan Skarsgard, one of the few actual Swedish actors that are in this movie, and of course he turns out to be the one that they're, you know, this serial killer of women, and he's a fucking psycho. That just his acting, Stellan Skarsgård is one of the greatest actors of all time, and no matter what he's in, he adds a level of brilliance to it that really just can't be rivaled. You know, even in something, his most recent effort, Sentimental Value, which feel free to check out my quickie review on that. You know, he does an exceptional job of playing like this, you know, filmmaker that's just detached from reality and can't really connect with his children and grandchildren unless it's through the cinema. And so, but here he's just a fucking psycho that's, you know, and all that shit, you know, listening to Enya while he's torturing his victims. You know, there's a lot of layers to it. It's like when you go back and watch this movie, you know, you just always see something that you didn't see before, and how they do that, you know. And even like I said, it saves you the trouble of having to read the book again, and it really, like, oh man, there were like layers there that you don't see in the film, in the book, you know. And in this edition as well, you know, this came out probably early 2012, because this movie came out in December of 2011, I believe. And, you know, I saw it twice in theaters. But this whole, like, Sony did a really good job of, This is like Criterion level stuff. I mean, Jesus Jones, look at that. That is fucking beautiful. Like, just hell of an edition, Blu-ray that just fucking pops. You know, it really captures the muted tones of David Fincher's style, specifically this one with the melancholy snow and everything. And, you know, just minor complaints with this film, but it's very, like, David Fincher has a way of making fucked up material, you know, entertaining to watch, you know, whether it's Seven or Fight Club or Panic Room, Zodiac, and even Gone Girl. You know, this was kind of, you know, this kind of feels like him getting ready to do Gone Girl, because I think he might have did something in between this one and Gone Girl, but this was like, I would probably say peak David Fincher. You know, his stuff kind of goes in waves. You know, his output varies depending on, honestly, just depending on the material that he's thrown. And, you know, this is pretty decent material. Like, I mean, like I said, the books are okay. They're very, you know, they're very much like not just a celebration of getting vengeance on sexual predators, but also like a celebration of Sweden and an open discussion about the history shit, which I don't know hardly any of. I'm a dumb American, but all I know is that this film is really good. The soundtrack's phenomenal. The acting's phenomenal. David Fincher knocks it out of the park, but also he does have an excellent script by Steven Zalian and an excellent score by Trent Reznor. So if you haven't seen this or read the book, you know, definitely check it out, because, you know, that one, you know, it's dark material, but, you know, sometimes dark material can be entertaining, and this is living proof of that. And of course, this has been another edition of Ethan's Movie Lounge. And whenever a film, you know, that I just particularly try to check out, you know, just randomly pops into my head, you know, I'll do one of these. And, you know, maybe if I have, you know, other collaborators or guests that want to do certain movies, I'm always down. If I haven't seen them, I'm sure as hell watch them. But as you can see, I have seen a lot of movies. I really like movies. You know, I know a lot about them. You know, my knowledge of bullshit is limitless. So if you think your knowledge of bullshit is even more limitless, hit me up, or feel free to eviscerate me in the comments if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, or if you think the movie's just bullshit. You know, I mean, hell, everything's open for debate. That's the beautiful thing about the cinema. And, you know, there's not a whole lot that you can dispute on that, because art is subjective. And this film, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, is definitely a work of art, just cinematography wise, screenwriting, directing, acting, musically. This is a real gem, and one of the few times that the American version got it better than the country of origin version. So it's been another edition of Ethan's Movie Lounge. Stay tuned for more. You know, I also do the 70s versus 90s. There's quickie reviews, and there's even the elusive second take. So, you know, whole lot of motherfucking content.